Hello.
Hello?
Hold on, let me see. Uh,
Hello?
can you hear me?
Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you.
I can't hear you. Can you, can you say something?
Is that any better?
There we go.
Okay,
I,
awesome. Sometimes my speaker does not work very well. Well, it's so nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Well, I'm working on so many different platforms and doing so many different things that I'm jumping from one device to another, and half the time the audio, it takes a while to pop in. So sorry for that.
No, it's no problem. And I'm really excited to learn in this episode. Were you good with all the questions Meg sent over?
Oh, I'm fine with anything you want to do.
Okay, perfect. Because I figured we'll keep it organic, but we'll move through a lot of the questions. It normally lets me, I think for some reason I'm set up not to be a host because it won't let me stop the recording, but I'll just figure out what time we start recording and edit
Okay?
it down. Um, but we'll jump right in and then I'll go back in and record the intro. So I'll do your bio, which I got from Henry. If there's anything that needs to be different on there, let me know. But otherwise, I'll use that for your bio and your photo. But do you have any other questions for me before we dive in? I try to keep them around like 30 minutes. So I try to be like relatively concise. I find that a lot of our listeners don't love like a 2 hour long podcast. So we'll keep it concise, but I'm really excited. Any questions you have for me?
No, if you want to keep it to 30 minutes, then if I would like to, if you don't mind, my preference would be that we focus then on the polysaccharide research, because in my opinion, that's the most valuable thing I can contribute
Yes.
to listeners in terms of something that's very unique, they probably have no clue about,
Yeah.
and it also is the most impactful. So, I mean, it's nice to hear about people's interests in terms of their diet or their exercise or whatever, but
Yeah.
really in terms of what I can contribute, it's something very unique that's very impactful. And again, every time I give a lecture or a talk, no, 90 something percent of the audience has no clue what I'm talking about. And then afterward, they're like, oh my God, I had no idea. So,
Well, maybe we'll start then with a little bit about your background, why you're passionate about nutrition, and then go right into the question four about sharing your research at the University of Miami. Because wasn't your research, a lot of it was on polysaccharides?
correct. Well, the
Um,
most significant part of it was.
okay, awesome. So we'll do number one and then we'll go to number four to hear a little bit about your research. And then we'll dive into the polysaccharides. And then depending on time, we'll go back up to like, do you believe that there is a perfect diet or is it very individualized for all of us type thing?
Okay, good. Yeah, because that kind of thing, I don't know, to me is just kind of like opinion, and
Yes.
it's just something to say, oh, well, Lewis believes this, but it doesn't really, that's just his opinion. So,
Yes. Yes. I love that. And you go by Dr. Lewis, right?
yes,
Okay. Perfect. Okay. Well, let's jump in. Are you ready?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
All right. Well, welcome to the show, Dr. Lewis. I am so happy to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's my pleasure. I look forward to our conversation today.
Well, and I want to like dive right in and I want to hear a little bit about your background and really what got you into nutrition. So tell us a little bit about you.
Well, I started out a long time ago playing sports when I was a kid. And then as I got into college and started getting into drug-free competitive bodybuilding, that was when I shifted into a real focus on nutrition in terms of, I would call it performance. But I realized at some point, a couple of years into it, I was not going to make a living as a bodybuilder. I was not interested in taking the drugs that the guys that do make a living at it take. I had no interest in, taking all those risks associated with not just steroids, but insulin, growth hormone, all these other things that these guys are doing today. And so I shifted my focus more of to a health perspective as opposed to a sports performance perspective. And I don't think there's anything wrong with utilizing nutrition for performance. Of course, if you're an athlete, if you're getting paid millions of dollars a year to play a sport, why wouldn't you focus on nutrition to play your best? But obviously, for all the rest of us out there that are not genetically blessed to perform at that high of an athletic level, you should look at nutrition as your number one interest for taking care of yourself. I mean, to me, if you look at the literature, and don't take my word for it, but just go to PubMed and look at all the research that's published around chronic disease, and I think the number one strategy, lifestyle behavior, whatever you want to call it, without question is nutrition, other than a few maybe isolated incidences related to, say tobacco use and lung disease. But anything else, nutrition by far and away is the number one focus. So I've been at this for a very long time, both professionally and personally, in terms of utilizing nutrition to my advantage to optimize my health, to live the healthiest life I can. And I got very fortunate in the work that I did at the University of Miami when I was in academics for about 20 years. I focused a lot of my research on nutrition and dietary supplementation, excuse me, and made some really nice discoveries. And so for me, I'm just very passionate about nutrition and what that means to health. And of course, being plant-based, this is my 27th year being plant-based. I'm obviously in the other camp, unlike the carnivore crowd that's growing, I guess, in some level of popularity. To me, carnivore movement is just another spin or take on Atkins. It's nothing new. It's been relabeled. And then, of course, you've got, the paleo people and the keto people, they all kind of run in the same crowd. So they don't really care for people like me, but I'm not here to argue. I've already had enough drama and arguments in my life. I don't care. If you don't believe it, that's fine. Eat your meat and go forward. I mean, I don't care really. I've got too much other stuff to do and too many other things I'm focused on. So I know nutrition is a very controversial topic, but I feel like to each his own, and to each her own, whatever your sex is, and go forward. But again, for me, it's the most important thing that we can utilize to either our advantage or disadvantage in terms of our health.
And food is medicine, right? I mean, that's like, I feel like a quote that was said decades and decades, hundreds of years ago, and then we forgot about it. Right. So I'm happy that we're having this conversation. I have to know though, what is the craziest diet you did when bodybuilding naturally? Did you ever do anything like the potato diet for, up until competition? Was there anything crazy that you did back in your younger years?
Well, at that point, I was not vegan, but I had pretty much at that point eliminated beef. And growing up in Tennessee, I'd never really been a seafood eater either. So it was really, the craziest, I guess you could say the craziest thing that I did just to get, still have some sufficient level of caloric intake while keeping focused on my body fat content was basically eating grilled chicken breast, anything green, and either brown rice or baked potatoes. And that was really it. I mean, it was just a very, bland, simple diet, and it didn't have a lot of bells and whistles. It was just very basic. And then, of course, I mean, to me, like, you look at somebody in competitive shape at 3-4% fat or whatever. And I mean, at least I do. I mean, this is my own thing. I look at that body and I think, wow, that's really impressive. Like, to get that, even if you are taking drugs, to get to that shape, to get to that condition is a lot of work and a lot of effort and a lot of desire, motivation, all these things. But, at some point, like mentally, you start to lose it because you get aggravated, you get irritable, you get moody. I mean, all these things, the human is not, that's just not healthy. I mean, that was a big part of, in addition to deciding I was never going to make a living at this, I didn't want to expose myself to all the drug use. It's not healthy. I mean, to live in that mindset of just only eating like, whatever, 1,800 calories a day, or depending on your size, 2,000, even more, I guess, if you're 300 pounds. But just limiting yourself that way to such an extreme fashion, I mean, to me, is just not healthy. I had
a patient several years ago that ate super, super clean in like the cut phase. And then like 24 or 48 hours before the competition, only ate potatoes because apparently potatoes saturated the muscles and had them like pop more. So they didn't eat carbs, they cut, and then they potato loaded.
Right.
And I just remember being like, how do you and they would talk about how dry the potatoes got, like how horrible they were because they couldn't mix them with anything. It was just like boiled potatoes that they just ate. Yes. So I just was always so interested in anybody that's done bodybuilding. I'm like, okay, to what extreme? Because I mean, this is hours in the gym. And so I always know anybody that bodybuilds has phenomenal discipline, for sure. Because exactly right. But I want to hear, you talked a little bit about like your time in academia. So share a little bit about your research at the University of Miami.
Well, the most exciting thing that I can share with you and your listeners or viewers is that my colleagues and I owe all of this to two people who introduced me to the value of polysaccharides beyond a fuel source for the cells, and that is Dr. Reg McDaniel and Barbara Kimley. Dr. Reg talking about the allopolysaccharides and Barbara talking about the rice bran polysaccharides. But we ultimately ran several clinical trials with these two materials that just, I mean, to me, you can put them up against any other thing that Mother Nature has given to us for potential health benefit in terms of their immunomodulatory capability, in terms of their ability to lower your inflammation. And I'm talking the chronic type, not the acute type, to generate adult stem cells, to turn on all these different cell subsets within the immune system, to their antioxidation status, to affect telomeres. I mean, on and on and on. These wound healing, these effects are just incredible. And probably out of all of that, probably the two most rewarding studies were the ones in people with moderate to severe Alzheimer's disease and in people with relapsing remitting multiple sclerosis. We showed just incredible results over a 12-month intervention, giving these folks this particular dietary supplement formulation based on this aloe vera rice bran complex. And in the folks with Alzheimer's disease, and these were people moderate to severe disease, right? So these are people Big Pharma cares nothing about. They had to have been diagnosed at least for 1 year, and they had to have been at least at the moderate severity level. So really sick people, 79.9 years of age on average. And obviously they didn't just have Alzheimer's, they had diabetes, they had depression, different forms of heart disease, all sorts of other comorbid issues. But we showed at 9 and 12 months, statistically and clinically, significant improvements in cognitive function in this population, according to the ADAS-Cog, which is the gold standard for assessing cognitive function in people with dementia. And then at the cellular or physiological level, we showed an improvement in the CD4 to CD8 ratio, which is not just important for people with Alzheimer's, that's important to all of us. That's your ratio of your helper cells to your cytotoxic cells. We showed reductions in TNF-alpha and VEGF, which are proteins commonly looked at in cancer and cardiovascular disease. And then in that first paper, we also showed just under a 300% improvement or increased production of CD14 cells, which are a marker of our adult stem cells. So that was all published in that first paper. I mean, just again, incredible results that, and that was published in 2013, that really, I mean, even before or even since, no one else has published anything like that. I don't care if it's a diet, if it's exercise training, another type of dietary supplement, hyperbaric oxygen, acupuncture, music therapy, I mean, you name it. Even the 5 FDA-approved drugs for dementia don't show that.
Wow. So break down, like, what are polysaccharides?
So polysaccharides are complex sugars. And of course, unfortunately, we've been conditioned for decades, literally, as a population to believe that anytime you hear the word sugar, it means bad, right? I mean, that's usually the first thing that pops into someone's head when you hear the word sugar is, oh, that's bad. But that could be further from the truth. And as somebody who's a scientist, who's an author, who spent my career, writing and being very particular about the language, I think it's important for us to recognize that a sugar is not a sugar, meaning that Mother Nature, I mean, I don't even know how many sugars there are that naturally occur. There must be hundreds, if not thousands, but you basically have 3 types. You have the monosaccharides, which are the simplest form, like high fructose corn syrup. Totally agree, try to avoid those, if not eliminate them entirely. Then you have disaccharides, which are a little more complex. They're usually like 2 glucose units linked together. And then the most complex are the polysaccharides, which literally have hundreds of different glucose units attached together with different glycosidic bonds. And the ones that come from aloe vera and rice bran are just, again, incredibly efficacious. I know nothing else. Maybe you could make an argument for curcumin, but beyond curcumin, I know nothing else in the literature. And this is not just from our lab. This is from people all around the world looking at these polysaccharides. So for any of you listening, please, again, be mindful of the word sugar. Just because somebody says sugar, that does not mean bad. And don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Again, high fructose corn syrup is a monosaccharide that's very detrimental to our insulin response, our glucose response. But please do not confuse that type of sugar with the complex sugars that come from aloe vera and rice bran, because they are completely different. They have far different effects on our cells and our body as a result of that.
Do you think, are these polysaccharides as one of the ways they work? Is it feeding our gut microbiome? Like, are these polysaccharides, are they, being that they're more complex sugars, you know, I immediately go to like more complex fibers and the role that they play with the gut microbiome. Have you seen research in the gut microbiome side of disease prevention and management, or is it more the cell membrane? And is it more like fuel for our cell membranes healing and recovering? Like, what do you think the beneficial aspect of these complex sugars is in the body?
That's a great question. So yes, to answer the first part of your question, yes, there is some research suggesting, I don't know particularly about the ones coming from aloe and rice bran. I know that beta glucan is a pretty complex polysaccharide that is typically found in oats. And there has been research looking at how beta glucans affect, our microbiome. So definitely there is something to how they sort of function, really more like a prebiotic as opposed to a probiotic. So yes, they definitely have a profound impact on the microbiome. However, where I think they have the most benefit is that they actually function like signaling mechanisms for our immune system, whether it's our helper cells, our cytotoxic cells, our natural killer cells, our dendritic cells. We have a lot of research that we published related to this concept. And so I think because they have so much coded information in them, and as you know, the genes don't do anything until they receive information from the environment. And then whatever that information is, that's how they guide the cells to function. So again, it really seems like these things ultimately function as like signaling mechanisms for all the different cellular subsets within the immune system.
Well, I immediately thought when you talked about beta glucan, I didn't realize that was a polysaccharide. We use that a lot in Step Wellness for cholesterol and diabetes. And Absolutely. I've seen people's cholesterol. We use a company called Nutrum. I don't know if you've heard of them, but they're just like basic beta glucan powder that you add in. And we've seen cholesterol drop by like 20, 30% in a 3-month period, and A1Cs come down, which is really interesting. Can you, like, what other foods? So you could like eat polysaccharides naturally in our diet. Is that correct? Or you feel like you can't get the therapeutic level through food alone?
Well, first of all, anytime you think of aloe vera, what do you think of? You think of a topical purpose, right? You don't even think of consuming it orally unless it's some aloe vera juice drink, which I think that's okay. But in my opinion, that's a very limited use of what the plant gives us. So in reality, you don't get that much from aloe vera. I mean, you will not get the aloe polysaccharide from any other plant. It really is, I'm being very specific about aloe vera here. The rice bran, unfortunately, 70 to 80% of the rice sold in the world is white rice. So you have the outer husk or hull. That's inedible, of course. Then the next layer is the bran. Well, the bran, again, is almost all the time stripped off, and it's either thrown away or fed to the livestock. So 70 to 80% of the rice that's being eaten is just the white endosperm that's basically just digestible fiber. So all that beauty that is in the rice plant actually, for the most part, is thrown away. But I would argue still, even if you're eating brown rice every day, which I eat probably 3 or 4 days a week, I still don't think, to your question, and especially if you're sick, with something really severe like neurodegeneration, cancer, diabetes, heart disease, whatever, I think it would be probably difficult to get enough of those polysaccharides just by eating brown rice. I think you do need a concentrated source of those polysaccharides, and that's where dietary supplements obviously can come in. Now, obviously, you can get polysaccharides from other things too. I mean, lots of vegetables have different types of polysaccharides. Of course, seaweeds do. All the different exotic mushrooms have polysaccharides. So there are lots of different sources for polysaccharides. But again, when I look at the literature, and I don't claim to be an expert on every polysaccharide out there, there are just too darn many. There's no way I could know everything about all of these different sugars, but I do believe, again, and I hope I'm not sounding too much like a broken record here, but I do believe I would put the aloe vera at number one and the rice bran just at number two, just below it. And so that's why I think it's important to get those things in a dietary supplement, because in the former, you're definitely not getting them in your food. And in the latter, you're probably getting very little of it in your food.
Is the research consistent on the milligram? Is it in milligrams for polysaccharide
Yes,
supplementation?
correct.
Is the
Correct.
research very similar? Is there like a wide range of milligrams used for therapeutic effects?
So, for example, in our research, I mean, we were talking, I would say we're talking up to no more than about 2 grams per day when you combine the materials together. So you're not really talking about a lot of material. I know sometimes when people hear the word rice, they think of arsenic, right? I mean, you know, that's typically a concern with rice, which every time we run a certificate or we run an analysis, we do, you know, third-party testing on our materials. We always come back within normal limits of arsenic. And if it ever becomes too much, then we just throw it away and not use it. But and then, of course, people are concerned about lectins, but you know, again, lectins are processed out when you stabilize the rice bran, so that's not a worry for people anyway. And then the people that are all into ketosis and they're worried about, you know, getting kicked out of ketosis. I mean, again, you're talking a few hundred milligrams to a couple of grams of material per day that, again, is not going to infringe on your goals or whatever you're trying to achieve with ketosis. But I think, again, you know, for most people, and I've been taking this formula for over a decade now. Our daughter just turned 4 years old a couple of months ago. I started her on it when she was 6 months old, when we started introducing her to solid foods. And then my wife took it when she was pregnant. My mother's been on it even longer than I have. And I won't tell you her age. She's very sensitive about that. But let's just say she's an elderly lady. And so, you know, for me, that's part of the other issue too, is prevention is just as important as dealing with something once you've been diagnosed or something clinically comes out. So I mean, to me, I look at this like, you know, drinking my water every day or whatever else that I eat for my daily sustenance. To me, this is just part of my daily routine to help me protect from getting, you mentioned diabetes, and we've seen amazing results with stuff like that as well, that we haven't had the money for, you know, for running a clinical trial in, but in terms of just anecdotal cases and glycemia of different types and whatnot. But I think prevention is just as important as rehabilitation or treatment. So to me, again, these are just right there with oxygen and water as being the most essential of anything I could take every day. In fact, if you ask me what would be my number one thing to take that I would supplement with every day, it would be these polysaccharides. But,
And is it a powder? Is it a
it's
powder you like
powder.
add to your water?
Yes.
Does it have a flavor? Is it pretty mild?
So naturally it has, you know, the bran obviously is kind of like a graham cracker type of taste
Yeah.
to it. We have a little bit of citric acid in there, a little bit of vanilla flavor. It's kind of, in my opinion, it's kind of like a vanilla citrusy graham cracker. So to me, it's a very pleasant taste. We have it in a capsule version too for people that don't like texture or, you know, flavor, for those negative Nancy types. we
Yeah.
we also put it in a capsule so that way we can deal with those folks as well.
And you said it's 2 grams or like 2000 milligrams a day is the therapeutic
Right.
dose.
For a lot of people, yes, that will definitely work. Now, again, if you're dealing with, and maybe it's a good point for me to say too, that, you know, please, any of our listeners or viewers, don't ever interpret me saying anything that I'm using nutrition to treat disease. I'm very clear that the nutritional model is far different from the pharmacological model, meaning that we're providing the raw materials the body needs to restore itself and heal itself. And that's a way stronger and more powerful paradigm than using one chemical for one, you know, alteration of a metabolic pathway to deal with a symptom of a disease. So this is not treating disease. This is providing the raw materials that the genes recognize and then tell the cells how to function properly to basically restore homeostasis. But I mean, depending on if you have, say, stage 4 cancer of some type versus just somebody like me that's, you know, healthy and just trying to prevent such things, your dose could be very different. And of course, as you know, as a clinician, obviously there could be lots of other nutritional, health history, clinical issues, medication consumption, whatever, that can also be impacting the amount of someone's dose as well. Plus age, obviously, we're not getting any younger. So as we age, we typically need more support. And I like to work with, you know, as many people as I can individually who are interested. I like to work with as many people as I can individually to help them kind of find that sweet spot where they can balance their checkbook if they need to with the dose that's the most efficacious, and especially, again, given someone's current situation and what their needs are.
Have you seen any side effects? Like, has anybody had constipation or diarrhea or like indigestion, or it's pretty like not a lot of side effects reported in your guys' studies?
So very few, very few side effects. I mean, these, again, when you think of aloe vera and rice bran, they're typically two plants that very few people react to in any major way. There are, I would say, it's maybe 1% of the people that will take a dose and then they'll start having, it's not full-blown diarrhea, but it's probably like a little bit of a, let's call it a loose stool for lack of a better term. And then of course they get freaked out. They think, oh, this is bad or something. And I have to tell these people, no, look, this is actually the body cleansing itself. This is actually, it's almost like a Herxheimer reaction where you're taking an amount. And what I usually tell these people to do is dial it down, like reduce the dose. And then if you'll have, a more gentle response to it, maybe it's more acceptable. But again, that's even pretty rare. We do put in an ultra terra clay in the formula as well. That's also, as you know, a very potent chelator and detoxifier. But again, those kinds of reactions are few and far between, especially if somebody starts out at a fairly low dose and then works their way up. But I mean, I've had people taking, gosh, 8, 10, 12 grams per day, depending on their situation and how severe it was, and had no problems. And if anything, also because of the way the allopolysaccharides work, they kind of function as like an emulsifier, even though obviously they're not fat soluble, they're water soluble, but they function in a way that is almost like they attach to other materials to help them become more bioavailable, more absorbable. So the allopolysaccharide is a really fascinating material in terms of not only having its own benefits, but it's kind of like the mule, if you will. It kind of helps other things work even better.
And I know you mentioned your study was a year long. Is that right?
Correct.
So a lot of times, like at STAT, for example, we'll draw some labs, meet with a patient, repeat in 3 to 4 months. Would you see some improvements in that 3 to 4 month period? Or like how long do you tell people like this is the long haul? Like you're gonna need to be on this for 6 months or a year to see shifts in blood work. So like, for example, we track CRPs a lot. It's a very inexpensive way for us to manage and track like low grade chronic inflammation. Right. When would you expect to see a CRP change with polysaccharide supplementation?
So this is a great question. So most people fall into what I would call 3 categories. You have the super responders. Those are folks that literally will start feeling, I've literally had people tell me in 48 hours, they started noticing things. They started immediately sleeping better. They started having I've had people with all sorts of bowel issues, constipation, diarrhea, whatever, like literally they'll start it and then a few days later they're pooping like a champ, and they're, in their words, all sorts of different mental, cognitive effects, of course. And so those super responders are usually like in that 48-hour to say 2-week window, and that's about 20 or 25% of people. The majority of people fall into that 30 to 60 day range. That's 50 to 60% of people. And then the last group, maybe again, another 20% or so, they'll take 60 or 90 days. In terms of what we see in the blood, unfortunately, the two trials that we ran in Alzheimer's and MS, we only had enough funding in our budget to draw blood at baseline and 12 months. So we don't know what was going on there, at 3, 6, and 9 when we were doing the cognitive functioning and the quality of life stuff, those other assessments. But from some other research, what I would tell you is, and especially with something like CRP, and as you well know, CRP is very sensitive to a lot of different things. So you could be not too inflamed from one thing, but then get a cold or the flu or something, and then your CRP goes through the roof from something else. But I would say that probably you'd notice, if you were looking at CRP and maybe a few other cytokines or growth factors, you would definitely notice something within a 90-day period.
Mm. Have you used it in track CD57 on any patients, or like your kind of chronic Lyme mold type patients? Have you seen any clinical or research in that space?
So with Lyme disease, I could ask Dr. McDaniel. I'm pretty sure he's worked with some patients who have had chronic Lyme issues. I can't think of any off the top of my head, any papers referencing CD57 though. I'd have to do a little homework for you on that one.
Well, we started tracking it a lot more because it's kind of interesting. Like a lot of these Lyme-like infections and now COVID, some of our long haul COVID patients, they're all presenting the same way with these massive dips in natural killers. So CD57 is just a natural killer, and we'll start to see it really low with some of these chronic infections. And it's interesting now with COVID too. And if it's like, this is another tool that's side effect free, that's not disrupting the gut microbiome, helping with the gut microbiome, it's worth a try. You mentioned the chelator. Do you have to take it away from other supplements, or do you have to take it away from food when you're supplementing the polysaccharides?
No, not at all. I mean, I take all of my stuff at the same time. I usually, other than my evening dose of my formula, I take everything else in the morning on a fasted stomach when I wake up. So I'm taking my, my C and my B complex and my everything else in the morning. So no, I haven't had any problem with that. In fact, the clay works very nicely because it's a positive cation. So it's not pulling out, the other good stuff along with it, like the magnesium or the calcium. It's only focused on, all the synthetic stuff that gets lodged in the fat tissue. So it's not at all problematic in terms of stripping out vitamins and minerals along with all those other bad things that accumulate in our fat tissue.
So it's similar to like zeolite clay. I feel like zeolite clay is very similar in the fact that you can take it with or without supplements long term.
That's right.
Well, I'm very excited because I've never had a patient start polysaccharides. I guess I have because I've used Nutrim before. So this is like a whole new thing that I'm going to be getting into the research too. And it feels like it's a great option for anybody even going through chemotherapy. Like there's no contraindications on anybody that can't take polysaccharides.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, again, as I mentioned, I've had our daughter on it since she was 6 months old. My wife took it the whole time she was pregnant. She's pregnant again. I've got her taking it, religiously. My mother's been on it for over 15 years. Actually, I'll just tell you my mom's anecdote real quickly. When I met Dr. McDaniel almost 20 years ago, my mom was having knee pain, and this guy was kind of like our family orthopedist. He either operated on or put a cast on practically every primary member of my family due to, sports injuries and whatnot. But he tells her, "Oh, Joanne, you've got a little arthritis in there. Probably at some point you'll need a knee replacement." So I talked to Dr. Reg. I said, "Hey, have you had any? I know you have not had the money to run a clinical trial, but have you had any experience with the polysaccharides helping people with different joint deterioration issues?" And he said, "Well, as a matter of fact, we have, and your mother has nothing to lose." I kid you not. Here it's been, going on 17 years later or whatever it's been. She never had to have a knee replacement.
Well, I love that. And I love trying every single thing that I have my patients do. So I'm going to be a client of yours. I'm going to get this polysaccharide. What is the product called? And I'm going to link it in the show notes.
Sure. Well, I'd be happy to send you a couple of samples and, try it out for yourself and then get started. We can talk about stuff like that offline. But our flagship product, based on all of this work that I conducted at the University of Miami, is called Daily Brain Care. And we chose that name for two reasons. We could have named it lots of other things, but obviously, as you know, again, in your clinical work, anything brain related, whether it's, children with attentional issues or autism, all the way to the end of life with neurodegeneration, and then all of us in between with, mood disorder, concussion syndrome, PTSD, you name it, TBI, whatever. I mean, literally, it cuts across every segment of society in terms of some brain issue, right? So we felt like, based on our research, we had very strong support to put claims on a label that would help people looking for some hopefully efficacious alternative that, conventional medicine or conventional approaches were not doing for them. And so that was one thing, that we had our own science to support the claims that we make. And then related to that, just again, because of the desperation of a lot of people looking for answers that, unfortunately, conventional medicine just doesn't really offer much efficacious opportunity. So we felt like that was kind of a no-brainer, no pun intended, to call the flagship product Daily Brain Care. But we're launching some other products here within the next few weeks. We're going to have Daily Immune Care. That's a tweak on this, but again, we have such strong immune function data that again, that's going to be a product that's just, I think, a real slam dunk. And then we have a curcumin product coming out, a berberine product, and a vitamin D3 K2 product, and an EGCG product. So we're expanding our product line. It's been a lot of focus these first few years just on daily brain care, but now it's time for, the baby's starting to come into being a toddler now, and, starting to advance in our company's life cycle. And we've got some really exciting things coming out. And a lot of this is based on my manufacturing partner. He has a patented liposomal processing technology where a lot of these materials like curcumin and berberine, I'm sure, as you know, they have very, very poor bioavailability and poor absorption. And so if you're taking these products, but they're not formulated properly, you're basically wasting your money. And so we've got an opportunity to really bring to market products that will actually do what they're supposed to do and actually help people, as opposed to just looking good on a label and then, really not doing anything other than making your poop or your urine expensive.
When I started switching over to a liposomal curcumin with my patients is where I started to really see a lot more improvements in CRPs and white blood cells and knee pain. And so I'll make sure to link to your website so our listeners can stay tuned for the new launches. But as we wrap up, I want to hear a little bit more about, as a business owner, a dad, 4-year-old, and a new one on the way, how have you maintained? A lot of our listeners love knowing how people in the health and wellness space maintain, whether you want to call it balance or wellness integration, because our modern day world, it's a lot of sitting, it's a lot of stress, it's a lot of noise with text and phone calls and meetings. And so our listeners always love to hear, as we kind of wrap up, some like simple things that you do to stay feeling your best. So we know a little bit. You talked about the vegan and the polysaccharides,
Right.
but share some more, or maybe how you balance your proteins and fibers and carbs. Like, just share a little bit of what you feel like has had the biggest impact in your health journey.
Well, thank you for that question. I totally agree with you. I mean, it's just overwhelming, right? I mean, information overload is just overwhelming. But we didn't even touch on exercise or physical activity today, other than just, briefly mentioning my little experience with bodybuilding. But for me, even though I don't compete and I'm not up on a stage anymore on that, I still bodybuild. That's my type of exercise training. So for me, exercise is my number one go-to in terms of stress reduction. I just feel like daily movement, whether you believe in creation or evolution or some combination of the two, we were built to move, right? I mean, our body requires movement, and when we don't move it, we suffer greatly. And of course, it's easy day after day to get into a rut or get into this sort of, it's interesting, right? We sink, we never really rise. We like sink. So we always have to like work against that inertia to sink, because it's just so easy to sink. And so I tell people all the time, like, man, you've got to move. Like, I just lectured last weekend and I said, okay, throw out the 6 to 8 hours you need for sleep. And that, of course, is a bit individual specific. Some people do great on 6. I need 7 to 8, maybe most people, whatever, whatever that number is, immediately throw those hours out. But you still have somewhere between 16 and 18 hours a day to move at least 30 minutes in that day. And I work, I'm sure you do too. I'm sure, I bet you work just as much as anybody you know. I'm in that boat too. Excuse me. I work just as much as anybody I know. And I still find 30 to 60 minutes to move every single day, unless I'm sick or on an airplane or, something I can't deal in, it's just impossible for me to get any exercise in that day. So for me, like, movement is so important. And I think strength training, if the meatheads in the gym knew one thing many, many years ago, way before the exercise scientists did, that was strength training actually is so valuable, in the sense of, we used to think aerobic training or cardiovascular training conferred all these benefits for like aerobic function, or I'm sorry, cardiovascular health, like, your oxygen capacity, your blood pressure, your lipid profile, all these things. Now we know that strength training actually confers a lot of those same benefits. So the muscle heads from, the 60s and the 70s, they actually had it right on that level. Maybe they were overdosing on drugs, but still they had it right in terms of all these other health promoting benefits that we used to think, oh, you got to get on a treadmill or you got to run or you swim or whatever aerobically. So again, I'm just such a big proponent of movement combined with your nutrition. But you asked me about protein. Well, I think, for me, again, I've been doing this for so long, I don't really think too much about it, but I eat, like, for example, baked tofu. I'll have that a couple of times a week. We eat a lot of beans, lentils, again, brown rice I mentioned. We eat a lot of those all the time. Something green every day. I mean, leafy greens are just so important. Not only are they giving you your protein and your magnesium and your calcium, but also your fiber, your vitamin K2. I mean, they're just a lot of different. I bet you do this as well. The easiest thing I also tell people to do is, if you're confused about what it is you think you should eat or what's the best way to eat, just eat the rainbow. Eat as many different colors as you can. It's a simple way of helping people to remember, oh, well, yeah, I didn't have any orange today, or I didn't have any purple, or I didn't have any whatever, like all the different colors. As long as you're combining all those different colors, you're on the right track. And then hydration. I mean, I'm drinking. You see me already having, and you're doing it too. We're both having something to drink as we're talking to each other. I mean, to me, it's just so important to have your 2 to 4 liters of water every day. And then, of course, alcohol. I mean, that's another one too. I actually stopped drinking. I wasn't much of a drinker anyway. I mean, I went through my phase in college where I'd, go to a bar or a club with my friends and we'd have a few drinks on the weekend. But if bodybuilding did nothing else for me, it got me out of that type of social environment where you can't be in the gym every day for an hour and a half or 2 hours and then hanging out 2 or 3 nights a week, up until 2 or 3 in the morning. I mean, those are not compatible lifestyles. And I didn't really care for alcohol that much in terms of the taste of it anyway. It was just more of the socialization, and my friends were doing it. And I was like, yeah, whatever. But I got about, I don't know, it was 12, 13 years ago. I kept reading all of these epidemiological articles about how just even a little bit of alcohol intake would increase the risk of breast cancer for women, and then less so prostate for men. And I just started thinking, you know what? I only drink maybe a handful of times every year anyway. I'm just like completely done. And I literally have not had a drink of alcohol in now, whatever it's been, 12, 13 years ago. So I would encourage all of your listeners to really kind of look into that, because you think your glass of red wine every night with dinner may be healthy, but you know what? It may not. It may actually not be. And I would encourage everybody to go to PubMed and look into some of this research that's been published in the last 10 years about alcohol, and really take a hard look at that. If that's something that you think you're doing every night as a healthy behavior, it may not actually be.
I think there's more and more research we're seeing in this space, like even in the last year, 2 years. And then so many of my patients that wear Whoop bands or Aura rings, they've stopped drinking alcohol on their own because they've seen their HRV or their sleep quality, their recovery. They're like, I'm so tired of waking up in the orange or the red with their recovery. Wow. And so it's been really fun for me when I get my patients to wear wearables. A lot of this becomes so evident to them, right? They need to move their body. They need to be hydrated. They need to prioritize bedtime. And it's like, sometimes we need that data to track decisions when you feel good, right? Like when you feel good, sometimes it's so hard to make these decisions for the long term. So I love all of that. Well, this was great. I really appreciate you being on here. We really appreciate your wisdom. I appreciate learning more about polysaccharides and look forward to experiencing them with my own health journey. Absolutely. So thank you for sharing about this, and I'll make sure to put all your information in the show notes.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been great. I really enjoyed it.
It's so good. Thank you. That was wonderful. I will share it with you when it goes live. We're probably going to have it in about 3 weeks. So it won't be too long till it goes live, and I'll share it with you in case you have anybody to share it with.
Beautiful. Yes.
But yeah, I really appreciate it. And I will share the products in the show notes. And I look forward to trying them myself.
Please send me your address and I'll be happy to send you a sample of the powder and the capsules. And then if you
absolutely.
Yes. And if you want to do like an affiliate or wholesale relationship for your patients, I'd love to work with you at that level.
We literally just built out an affiliate page because have you looked at doing full script?
You know what? I've tried.
They're so hard to get into.
They really are. I mean, I've talked to them at several A4Ms and they say, oh yeah, this sounds great. And then I never hear from anybody. I had a very good friend of mine she's used full script for years. She said, oh, don't worry, I'm going to get you in there. She couldn't do anything. I don't know. I've kind of given up.
Yeah, I've heard that. That's crazy. Yeah, I have heard that. Well, we just created though an affiliate link for things that aren't on FullScript because it's hard
Okay.
for us to stock everything at Stat. It's just like there's so many good products out there that we just found like it's best for us to just have affiliate links. And I love
Sure.
like writing articles and linking to the products and things like that too. Can you also send me, or is it on your website, the research you did?
Oh, absolutely. I will email you. So we have 6 papers we published, 4 from the Alzheimer's study, 2 from the MS study, and then we have a 3rd paper from the MS study that's under review. Hopefully that'll be published in the next couple of months. So I'll send you all 6 of those. I can send you brochures.
Yeah.
Anything
That would be
you
awesome. I love reading the research. And that would be really helpful too, especially if we write an article about it too, and the benefit of polysaccharides.
Absolutely.
So this was wonderful. Well, it
I
was so
think,
nice to meet you.
oh, it was my pleasure. Well, again, without sounding too arrogant about it, I think you'll find very few products that have the amount of support behind daily brain care. I mean, there's just not that much out there that has this level of scientific support. I mean,
No.
this is like my inanimate baby.
Yeah.
It's
Well, and that's why I was curious how much of it was the gut microbiome and blood sugar balance. Cause I feel like those are the 2 things, like all research ends up eventually getting back to the role our gut microbiome plays and balanced
right.
blood sugar, right? Like Alzheimer's being type 3 diabetes and like ADHD being blood sugar imbalances. Like we're really big at STAT of wearing CGMs and monitoring blood sugar. And it's like, once you can normalize that, it's earth shattering.
Absolutely. Well, I think we can definitely work together and help your patients a lot with daily brain care, and then maybe throw in the berberine and the curcumin as well. I think that'd be like a really amazing combination.
Yeah. We use right now, and I don't know how you compare it to the liposomal berberine you're going to do, but we use Thorne's berberine, the phytosome. Have you
Okay.
looked at the phytosome technology? Is liposomal still going to be superior?
A little bit. I'm curious. We're going to do some testing. I don't know if we'll choose Thorne, but we're going to do some testing with some other products. We believe that our particle sizes will be pretty much lower than anyone else's. So that's what we're going to hang our hat on initially until we have some money to do some more clinical work.
Yeah. Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. It was so good to
Thank
meet
you.
you, and we'll be in
My
touch.
pleasure. Sounds
All right.
great. Have a great
Bye.
day. Bye-bye.